Have you ever wondered what happens when a mother's sacrifice is taken for granted, when unconditional love is met with shame and exclusion? This isn't a story about money. Money is just the weapon. This is about the raw truth of dignity and the price I paid to reclaim it. Listen closely, because in the terrifying silence of betrayal, the most perfect revenge is born. My name is Eleanor Vance. I am 62 years old, and I live in a house that has become too quiet. It was a Tuesday morning, the kind of still, sun-washed Denver morning that promises nothing and delivers exactly that. My world is one of order. As a retired history professor, I find comfort in cataloguing the past. My desk in the study, overlooking a garden I am perhaps too meticulous with, was covered in cardboard boxes of old photographic slides. I was sorting images of 6th century Byzantine mosaics for an academic paper I was writing for no one but myself. The small click of the slide projector, the dusty smell of the carousels. This was my life now. My phone vibrated against the polished mahogany, a harsh sound in the stillness. I already knew who it was. The caller ID confirmed it, Julian, my only son. "Hi, honey," I answered, my voice automatically warming. "Hey, Mum." His voice was fast, strained, the way it always was when he was walking and talking. I could hear the digital chime of an elevator, the muffled sound of traffic. "Listen, I can't talk long." "Oh, of course. Is everything all right?" Yeah, fine. Just really busy. This new project at Apex Solutions is massive. Mum, we're talking game-changing. I'm slammed." "That sounds wonderful. Julian, just remember to get some sleep." "I will. Look, I gotta run. I'll call you next week." "Okay. I love you." The line was dead. He had already hung up. The call lasted, perhaps, 20 seconds. I placed the phone down, my hand lingering on its cool, glass surface. The silence he left behind was heavier than before. I turned back to the slides, but the illuminated image of Empress Theodora suddenly seemed flat, lifeless. I remembered taking Julian to the museum when he was 8. He had held my hand, looked up at a towering T-Rex skeleton, and announced to the entire atrium, "My mum's a professor. She knows everything about history." He used to be so affectionate, so proud. Now, he was a 30-year-old man in Arizona who was slammed. I picked up the phone again. A familiar, faint sense of shame washing over me as I opened the social media app. It was a habit I'd acquired purely to feel some connection to him. I didn't follow Julian's account. He'd told me months ago he hardly ever used it, and that it was mostly for work contacts. But I followed Madison, his girlfriend, or perhaps fiancée, I was no longer sure. Madison was a personal branding expert, a job title that, as far as I could tell, involved taking hundreds of photos of herself in expensive, beige-colored clothing. Her feed was a relentless assault of curated perfection. I scrolled past pristine kitchens, artfully arranged lattes, and sunsets at 5-star resorts. And then I saw it. A blurry image from her story last week. Something I must have missed. It was a party, but not just any party. They were on a yacht, a gleaming, massive vessel, cutting through dark water. In the background, out of focus but unmistakable, was the back of Julian's head, the way his dark hair curled over the collar of his shirt. He was laughing, his head tilted towards someone I couldn't see. He had never said a word about a yacht. I closed the app, the brightness of the screen hurting my eyes. I thought of the sacrifices. My late husband, a man who loved the racetrack more than his family, had left me with a mountain of debt and a complicated, ironclad family trust. When he was gone, I was offered a tenure-track position at an Ivy League university, a dream. But Julian was 10. I turned it down. I stayed in Colorado, took a less prestigious post, and raised my son. I managed the trust, which was meant to be his future, with the same meticulous care I gave my research. A new email pinged on my laptop. It was from the bank, the one that administered the Vance Trust. The subject line was bland, regarding account 749B. I clicked. It was a standard automated notification. Unusual activity. A significant single withdrawal. We are flagging this as part of our standard review process. My heart didn't race. It just paused. The withdrawal was the $500,000 I had approved for him 6 months ago. He had come to me, full of frantic energy, talking about a startup investment, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I had been so thrilled he was asking for my advice, my help. I pushed the worry away. I had approved the transfer. The bank was simply doing its diligence. Julian was a good boy. He was just busy. This was just his work. I picked up my phone one last time and sent a text message. My thumbs felt clumsy on the screen. "Are you okay? Julian, I baked banana bread." I watched the phone. A minute later, the small, grey text beneath my message appeared. Seen. I waited. I stared at the screen, at that word, as the clock on the wall ticked. No 3 dots appeared. No response came. The silence in the room became absolute, a cold, heavy thing that settled around me. The bread was cooling on the kitchen counter, and my son was, it seemed, a world away. The scene notification stared back at me, a tiny, digital tombstone marking the death of a conversation. That, combined with the bank's email, created a knot of anxiety that was distinctly unprofessorial. I pushed back from my desk, walked to the large, built-in oak bookshelf, the one my late father had installed, and pulled a key from a small, carved wooden box. I unlocked the bottom right drawer, a place I rarely visited. Inside was a single, thick, leather-bound accordion file. The Vance Trust. I am not a wealthy woman by my own hand. I am a woman who lived on a professor's salary. But my father, a pragmatic man who had seen his own son-in-law gamble away a small fortune, had been determined to protect his grandson. The trust he established was his final act of control. I spread the documents on my desk, the heavy vellum crackling in the quiet room. I was the sole trustee. My name, Eleanor Vance, was on every page, granting me authority. Julian was the sole beneficiary. His monthly distributions, which I'd set up to cover his living expenses and tuition, had been automatic for years. But the principal, the millions in stocks and property that formed the bulk of the estate, was locked away. I ran my finger over the key clause, Section 4B. The principal was to be held until Julian's 40th birthday. I could almost hear my father's gruff voice in the legalese. But there was an exception, one I had insisted upon, or upon demonstration of sound judgment and legitimate family need, at the absolute discretion of the trustee. My discretion. My judgment. It had been 6 months ago. They had come for dinner, Julian and Madison. It was the first time I'd met her properly. She was dazzling, all sharp angles and bright, white teeth, and she filled my quiet house with a scent like burnt sugar and gardenias. She was a personal branding expert, and she spoke in a language I couldn't comprehend. It's all about the aesthetic. Eleanor, she'd said, holding her wine glass by the very tip of its stem, her eyes scanning my living room. Your brand is your life, and your life has to reflect that brand. It's about intentionality. I had just served the roast chicken. That's interesting. Madison. In history, we call that propaganda. She hadn't laughed. She'd just smiled, a tight, dismissive gesture. This house is so quaint, she'd added, gesturing to the floor-to-ceiling bookshelves that lined the room. It's cute that you still keep all these books. Physically, I mean, Julian, who had grown up reading in that very room, had just given a nervous chuckle and changed the subject. After dinner, while Madison was outside on the porch, curating her story, which involved taking photos of my hydrangeas in the dark, Julian had pulled me into the kitchen. He was vibrating with an energy I hadn't seen in him since he was a child. "Mum," he'd said, his voice low and urgent. "I have an opportunity. A real one. It's a biotech startup. A buddy from my MBA program is in on it. They're doing revolutionary gene splicing tech. It's a once-in-a-lifetime deal." He needed money. A lot of it. $500,000. My blood ran cold. I knew this tone. It was the same hopeful, frantic pitch his father used to have before a sure thing at the track. "Julian, that's a significant sum," I'd said, my voice measured. "I'll need to see the prospectus, the business plan, the SEC filings." His face fell. The eager light in his eyes dimmed, replaced by a sullen, adolescent frustration. "Paperwork, Mom. This is tech. It moves fast. By the time we get the paperwork, the window will be closed. Then it's not a sound investment, darling." He'd turned away, running a hand through his hair. Then he'd played his card. He'd turned back, his eyes full of manufactured hurt. "Don't you trust me? After everything I've tried to do, I'm finally getting my shot. Mum, I'm trying to build something. I just want to make you proud." It was a perfectly delivered blow. He knew my one great fear, that in my quiet, academic life, I had become irrelevant to him, that his new, shiny world with Madison had no place for me. My desire to be a part of his life, to be the supportive mother, overwhelmed my professorial caution. "All right," I'd said, my voice firmer than I felt. "I will authorize the distribution, but on one condition. This isn't a gift. Julian, it's an advance from the trust. It will be structured as a callable loan, secured against your future assets. A personal guarantee." "Whatever." "Mom?" "Yes." "Thank you." I had drafted the loan agreement myself, with the same precision I used for my research. I'd included clauses for immediate recall in the event of misrepresentation of funds. I wasn't a fool. I was his trustee. When he'd come by the next day to sign, his eyes were on his phone the entire time. "Just show me where... Mom?" He'd scrawled his name on the signature line without reading a single word. He hadn't even read the line stating the purpose of the loan for investment in a verified biotech entity known as Biogen Futures. And now, 6 months later, in my silent study, I held that agreement in my hand. I looked at his sloppy, impatient signature. That bad feeling from the bank's email returned, colder this time. What was this biotech startup? Why was Apex Solutions, the tech company he supposedly worked for, so all-consuming, I realized, with a sudden, sickening jolt, that in the 6 months since I had given him that $500,000, he had never sent me a prospectus, not a quarterly report, Not even a simple thank you email. Sleep did not come. The silence, once a comfort, now felt thin and cold. The banana bread sat untouched on the counter, a monument to my own foolishness. At 3 a.m, I was in my study, the blue light of my phone the only illumination. I couldn't bring myself to look at Madison's page again. I didn't want to see her curated joy, her perfect, filtered life. It felt like peering into the window of a party I wasn't invited to. So I just scrolled, letting the endless, meaningless images of the algorithm wash over me. A chef making pasta, a dog being rescued, and then a sponsored post. It wasn't for Madison. It was for a wedding photographer based in Scottsdale, Arizona. Capturing your perfect moment. The caption read, the first image in their portfolio was breathtaking. A couple, silhouetted against a sky on fire with sunset, stood on a rocky cliff overlooking a turquoise ocean. It was a stunning piece of photography. My finger went to zoom, a reflex I didn't even understand. My screen filled with the face of the groom as he kissed the bride. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't a stranger. It was Julian. He was wearing an ivory linen suit, his hair perfectly coiffed. He was kissing Madison, who looked radiant in a lace dress that must have cost more than my first car. They were beautiful. They were strangers. I tapped on the photographer's main feed. There it was, a full carousel of images, posted just a few days ago. My hand was shaking. I clicked. The location tag, Bali, Indonesia. The date stamp, 4 weeks ago. My heart was no longer beating. It was hammering, a cold, painful rhythm against my ribs. I swiped through the album. 32 photographs. Julian and Madison signing a certificate under a cascade of white orchids. Julian and Madison laughing as they ran down the beach. A long table set for dinner on the sand. Dozens of guests holding up champagne flutes. Fireworks exploding over the water. I studied the guests. They were all young, beautiful, and dressed in expensive, neutral-toned clothing. They were Madison's friends. Her brand. I looked for a familiar face, a distant cousin, a former colleague, anyone who had known Julian as a boy. There was no one. There was no one from my side of the family. I was not there. It was as if I, the woman who had brought him into the world, who had taught him to read, who had signed that loan agreement 6 months ago, had simply ceased to exist. I scrolled through the hundreds of fawning comments. Stunning. Goals. A perfect union. I searched for my own name, for any mention of the groom's mother. There was nothing. I was an anecdote he had forgotten to tell. And then I saw the video. The photographer had posted a short reel of the speeches. I turned the volume down, terrified of the sound. But I had to know. I saw Julian, my son, standing up, his face flushed with happiness and champagne. He raised his glass. To Madison, he said, his voice clear and confident, a voice I barely recognized. Who taught me how to live? And, he continued, turning to an elegantly dressed couple at the head of the table. And to my new parents, he gestured to Madison's mother and father, for welcoming me and for showing me what a real family is. A real family. The words hit me with the physical force of a slap. A real family. What had I been? Then, for the last 30 years, a placeholder, a financier. My thumb slipped. I was at the bottom, in the comments section of the video. I was about to close the app, to throw the phone across the room, when a name caught my eye. Catherine. Miller. Madison's mother. I'd met her once, briefly, at that disastrous dinner. Her comment was right below a string of heart emojis. So incredibly glad Julian has finally escaped the toxic influence from his past, she had written, for the entire world to see. Welcome to the light, son. We are so blessed to have you. My fingers went numb. I dropped the phone. It clattered onto the hardwood floor, the screen still glowing with her words. Toxic. My past. I, Eleanor Vance, the woman who had given up an Ivy League career, the woman who had protected his inheritance from his own father's legacy of ruin, the woman who baked him banana bread. I was the toxic past. He had escaped me. I bent down and picked up the phone. The screen was dark, but the words were burned into my mind. I did not cry. I sat there in the 3 a.m. darkness, and for the first time in my life, the grief that had lived in my bones for decades turned into something else. It cooled. It hardened. It sharpened. It turned into the clear, cold, and utterly precise rage of a historian who has just discovered the truth. I did not call Julian. The tears I expected did not come. The part of me that was a mother, the soft, forgiving, waiting part had evaporated at 3 a.m. What remained was the historian. When faced with a historical discrepancy, a lie, a gap in the official record, I do not get emotional. I get to work. I entered my study as the sun began to cast a weak, grey light across the lawn, made a pot of black coffee, and sat at my desk. My object of study, Julian Vance. My primary source, the public record. I opened my laptop. My hands were steady. My search began not with social media, but with the Maricopa County Assessor's Office, Arizona. The online database was efficient. I typed in his name. Julian Vance. Nothing under Vance, Julian. I paused. I thought of the wedding photos, the confident kiss. I typed Vance, Madison. Nothing. I went back to the photographer's post. Mr. and Mrs. Vance. Of course. I returned to the assessor's site and searched for transactions in the last 6 months. I typed in Vance as a grantee. No first name. A list appeared. And there it was. Property ID 301-45812. Grantees Julian Vance and Madison Vance as husband and wife. Sale date 4 months ago. Sale price $4,800,000. 4 months ago. Right after I had transferred the $500,000. The biotech startup. The once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. It was all a lie. The nauseating, elaborate, and cruel lie he had built, using my trust as his foundation. The money I had guarded for him, the money I had given him to make me proud, had been the down payment on a mansion. He had not just excluded me, he had stolen from me. He had used my love as collateral. Now, I went back to social media, but not as myself. I spent 20 minutes creating a new, anonymous account. I chose a generic name, a stock photo of a sunrise. I was no longer Eleanor Vance, grieving mother. I was Denver Reader, 19, an invisible observer. I followed Madison Vance. Her profile. Now that I was a follower, was a flood of content. She was posting constantly, documenting every second of her new life. And it was all happening inside that $4.8 million house. She posted a video tour. A day in my life at the new mansion. She chirped into her camera, walking through rooms so vast and empty they looked like art galleries. We just had to have the Italian marble countertops. She posted a photo of her legs, stretched out beside a shimmering blue infinity pool. Just deciding on the custom tiles. It's so hard to choose. She posted a story of Julian, laughing, as he tried to open a comically large bottle of champagne. Someone's excited for the housewarming party. It's going to be insane. In every post, every video, every background glimpse, he was there, my son, grinning, holding her, looking utterly at home. He looked like the king of a castle he had stolen. He was happy. He was thriving. He was a liar. I leaned back in my chair. I looked around my own study. My gaze fell on the spines of my books, the comfortable, worn armchair in the corner. I thought of the academic conferences in Paris and Rome I had skipped because Julian had a regional soccer tournament. I thought of my father's rare coin collection, his one true passion, which I had quietly sold, piece by piece, to pay for Julian's out-of-state university tuition, so he could be closer to a girlfriend he'd had at the time. This house wasn't just my home. It was the physical record of my sacrifice. And he had taken that sacrifice, that toxic past, and leveraged it for Italian marble. The rage, when it finally came, was not hot. It was not a fire. It was ice. It was a cold, pure, methodical certainty. I took a sip of my coffee. I opened a new, blank document on my computer. And, like a historian preparing a dissertation, I began to catalogue the evidence. I saved every post, every photo, every video. I cross-referenced the dates of Madison's posts with the date of the property purchase and the date of my bank transfer. I was building my case. The grief was gone, and the historian had taken over. And the historian knew one thing. The past, no matter how deeply you try to bury it, always has a way of being dug up. And I was bringing a shovel. I let my phone ring 3 times before answering. It had been weeks. A silence broken only by the digital echo of scene and my own obsessive research. Eleanor Vance, I answered, my voice neutral, academic. Mom, hey. The cheerfulness in his voice was so false, so high-pitched. It was almost grotesque. I know. I've been buried. You won't believe it. This startup stuff. It's exploding. We're in overdrive. It's insane. I sat at the desk in my study, the file containing the property records and his signed, defaulted loan agreement open right in front of me. Exploding, I repeated, my voice flat. That sounds vigorous. It is. Listen, I feel terrible. I've been so out of touch. Why don't you fly out? Maybe next month. I'd love for you to see the new place we're in. He delivered the lie so smoothly, so effortlessly. He had had practice. The son who used to stumble over his words when he'd forgotten to take out the trash was now a seamless predator. What a coincidence, Julian, I said, my voice as calm as the still air in my house. I'm in Scottsdale right now. A sound on the other end of the line, a sharp intake of breath, a muffled curse. Dead silence. For 3 full seconds, the only sound was the faint electronic hiss of the connection. What? His voice was a fraction of what it had been. The fake confidence was gone, replaced by a thin, reedy panic. You're here now where? I'm at the Phoenician. I lied, naming the most expensive resort I could think of. There's a conference on Byzantine legal reforms. It was a last-minute decision. Mom! Oh, God! Mom! No! He was stammering now, the words tumbling out. Tonight. Tonight is just... It's bad. It's a really bad night. Why? Julian. Are you all right? I let a note of false concern enter my voice. No, it's our housewarming party. He finally choked out. Madison has been planning it for months. I wanted it to be perfect for you. For when you came. I wasn't ready. We're not ready for me. No, for guests, I mean. For family guests. It's just a work thing. Mum. A bunch of Madison's clients. Don't be silly, darling, I said, my voice turning syrupy sweet. I wouldn't dream of imposing. I just want to stop by for 5 minutes. I have a small housewarming gift I brought from Denver. I can just drop it off. Send me the address. Mum, I don't think that's a good idea. Julian, I interrupted, my tone hardening just enough to remind him who I was. I am your mother. I am in your city. I am not going to be told I cannot see my son for 5 minutes. Send me the address, or I will have my hotel concierge find it for me. I'm sure the Maricopa County records are public. Another pause. He knew I'd do it. The historian in me never bluffed about research. Fine, he snapped, his panic turning to resentment. Fine. I'll put your name at the gate. He texted me the address. I hung up, went to my bedroom, and put on my black cashmere travel suit. I packed a small, empty, beautifully wrapped box. Then I got in my rental car and drove. The address was in a gated community carved into the side of a mountain. The guard, a stern man in a crisp uniform, checked his list. Vance, Eleanor. He asked, his eyes scanning me. Go ahead, ma'am. Julian, ever the efficient coward, had indeed called ahead. I followed a winding road past homes that were not homes, but compounds. I arrived at the address. It was not a house. It was a glowing palace of glass and white stone, lit up against the twilight, thrumming with music. Valets in red vests were sprinting to take exotic cars. I saw hundreds of guests through the massive, floor-to-ceiling windows, mingling on terraces, their laughter carrying on the warm desert air. I left my modest rental sedan with a bewildered-looking valet and walked up the marble steps. I was invisible. I was a 62-year-old woman in a sensible black suit, a ghost at their feast. I stepped into the foyer, a room so large it could have contained my entire first floor. The music was deafening. A waiter holding a tray of champagne flutes swerved around me, and then I saw them. They were descending the floating glass staircase as if on cue. Julian, in a perfectly tailored designer suit, his hair slicked back. Madison, in a shimmering, backless silver gown, her hand on his arm. They were the king and queen of their stolen castle. They saw me. Madison's smile, a fixed, brilliant thing, faltered. Julian's face went pale, a sickly, greenish white under the expensive lighting. They hurried down the last few steps and intercepted me before I could take a single step further into their home. Mum, Julian said, his voice a low hiss. What are you doing? Madison didn't even look at me. She didn't say hello. Her eyes were darting around the foyer, checking to see who was watching this domestic intrusion. Then she turned to Julian, her voice a sharp, venomous whisper, but one she intended for me to hear. I thought you said you handled this, she hissed, her painted red lips barely moving. She can't be here. She is ruining my brand. Julian looked ill, his skin waxy and pale under the expensive lights. Mum, now is not a good time, he whispered, his eyes darting to the crowd of beautiful people just behind me. I looked at my son, this stranger in a designer suit. I held out the small, empty, beautifully wrapped box. I brought you a gift, Julian. I just wanted to congratulate you on your wedding. Madison's head snapped toward him, her eyes like chips of ice. You told her, she hissed, her voice a low vibration of fury. Julian flinched. He turned back to me, and the shame, the cowardice, rolled off him in waves. He couldn't meet my eyes. His gaze was fixed on a point just past my shoulder. Mum, he pleaded, his voice barely audible over the music. Please, don't make a scene. Madison's mother is over there. Her father. They're important people. Important people, I repeated. The words were flat, dead in my mouth. I looked past him, at the woman who had called me toxic online, now holding a champagne flute and laughing. More important than your mother? I asked. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the noise between us. Madison, seeing her husband waver, stepped forward. She placed herself directly between me and Julian, a shimmering, silver wall of contempt. Listen, Eleanor, she said, and the informal use of my first name was a calculated insult. Let me be very clear, because you don't seem to get it. Julian has a new life now. We are building an empire. We have a brand to protect. His dramatic, poor past. It just doesn't fit with us. It doesn't fit with this. She gestured to the house, the people, the life built on my money, my dramatic, poor past. The past where I had skipped academic honours to watch his soccer games. The past where I had sold my father's treasures to pay his tuition. The past that had funded the very marble she was standing on. I said nothing. I looked past her, at Julian. This was his moment. This was the moment he could step forward, take my hand, and say, "That's enough, Madison. This is my mother." This was the moment he could undo the yacht, the wedding, the lies. He could choose. I waited. The beat of the music seemed to count the seconds. 1, 2, 3. Julian looked down at the floor. He stared at his own polished, expensive shoes as if they were the most fascinating things in the world. He was a coward, hollowed out by his own ambition. He had made his choice. Then, his hand went inside his suit jacket. He pulled out a thick, white business envelope. He wouldn't look at me. He just held it out. "Mom," he mumbled, his voice thick with a shame that was for himself, not for me. This is for your flight, first class, and the hotel. Just, please, go home. I'll call you. I'll explain. I'll call you." I looked at the envelope. He was paying me. He was trying to buy my silence, to pay me to disappear. After all I had done, after all I had given, he was treating me like a nuisance, an inconvenient creditor, a blackmailer to be paid off at the door of his new palace. That was the final humiliation, the last, thin thread of maternal affection I had been clinging to, the foolish hope that this was all a misunderstanding, snapped. It was not a misunderstanding. It was a transaction. He had just made his final payment. I looked straight into his eyes. He finally, fearfully, met my gaze. He was looking for his mother. He was looking for the woman who would forgive anything, who would absorb this pain, who would cry and go home and still love him. She was gone. The woman he found was someone else. She was cold. She was a historian who had found the truth. She was the sole trustee of the Vance estate. I gave him a single, sharp, professorial nod, a nod of acknowledgement, a nod of, I have received the data. I did not take the envelope. I turned my back on him. I turned my back on his wife, his party, his glass palace built on lies. I walked across the marble foyer, past the music, past the valet stand, and stepped out into the cool desert night. I did not look back. He was no longer my son. He was a liability, and the trustee was ready to act. The sun rose over the chemically green landscaping of the resort. But I had not slept. I had sat in the armchair by the window, watching the dark desert sky turn to a bruised purple, then a flat, pale blue. The humiliation from the night before had cooled and solidified into a singular, clear purpose. The part of me that was a mother, the part that wept and waited, was gone. The woman who sat in that hotel room was a trustee, a historian, an enforcer. I waited until exactly 9 a.m., Denver time. I picked up the receiver of the hotel telephone. The call went to Mr. Harrison, the Vance family trust lawyer for over 30 years. He was a kind man who always sent a poinsettia at Christmas. Eleanor, his voice boomed, full of false cheer. What a surprise. Are you in Denver? I am in Scottsdale, Mr. Harrison, I said, my voice as flat and dry as the desert air. I am calling to formally activate Clause 4B of the Vance Trust, the discretionary clause regarding breach of fiduciary judgment. There was a sudden, sharp silence on the other end. The false cheer evaporated. Eleanor, are you quite all right? That clause, that's the nuclear option. It's for severe malfeasance. Yes, I said. Fraudulent misrepresentation. Julian requested a $500,000 distribution 6 months ago for a biotech startup. He used it as a down payment on a $4.8 million mansion, which he purchased with a woman he secretly married in Bali 4 weeks ago. More silence. I could hear him breathing. My God, he finally whispered. I am not interested in the morality. Mr. Harrison, I am interested in the contract, I said. I am the trustee. My judgment is, as the trust dictates, absolute. I am judging that this was a fraudulent advance. I want the loan recalled, immediately. Harrison found his lawyer's voice, full of practical caution. Eleanor, activating the recall means the full $500,000 is due and payable, immediately. Today, he won't have it. I am aware, I said. He will default, and when he does, I want you to begin the proceedings to seize his assets as collateral. But Eleanor, he argued, the money is gone, sunk into a property he co-owns. His wife will have dower rights. It will be a legal nightmare. He doesn't have any other collateral of that value. We'll be lucky to get a fraction of it back. He does, Mr. Harrison, I said, my voice dropping. He has his signature. Do you have a copy of the advance agreement I drafted? The one I had him sign in my study? Yes. I believe we have it on file. The one you drafted yourself, against my advice. I might add. Please retrieve it. Turn to page 5. Section 3A. I waited. I heard the rustling of paper, the click of a mouse. Good Lord. Harrison breathed. Read it back to me, please. He stammered. Secured by a personal guarantee against all current and future assets, tangible and intangible, including all claims to future distributions from the Vance Trust, in the event of material misrepresentation of the fund's purpose, He paused. Eleanor, this isn't a loan agreement. This is a bear trap. Material misrepresentation. You had this in there from the start. I am a historian, Mr. Harrison, I said, looking out at the swimming pool, where a young couple was already drinking. I believe in precise language and primary sources. Julian told me it was for biotech. He bought a house. That is the definition of material misrepresentation. He was in such a hurry to get his money. He never bothered to read the fine print. He's signed away everything, Harrison said, his voice a mixture of horror and professional awe. He's personally collateralized the loan with his entire inheritance. He has, I confirmed. And I am his sole creditor. I want the demand letter delivered to him by armed courier by noon today. I want it delivered to that mansion. And I want the foreclosure proceedings to begin the moment the default deadline passes. I hung up the phone. I was not shaking. I felt nothing but the cold, clean satisfaction of a hypothesis proven correct. I picked up the receiver again. My second call was to one of the most expensive private investigation firms in Scottsdale. I need a team, I said to the man who answered. I need discreet, 24-hour surveillance on 2 individuals, Julian Vance and Madison Vance. I have the address. A significant legal action is being served against them today. I need eyes and ears. I want to know who they call, where they go. I want to know when the screaming starts. And, most importantly, I want to know when she leaves him. Do not be detected. I gave him my credit card. The price was exorbitant. It was worth every penny. I was no longer a victim. I was the historian. And I was about to watch my subjects react to a perfectly recreated consequence. I flew back to Denver that evening. I did not need to be in Scottsdale anymore. My work there was done. The legal machinery I had set in motion was far more efficient than I could ever be. I returned to my quiet house. I made tea. I began sorting my Byzantine slides again. The small, mechanical click of the projector a comfort in the silence. At 12:05 p.m. the next day, exactly 3 minutes after the demand letter was signed for at the Glass Palace in Arizona, my new, anonymous burner phone buzzed. It was a text from the PI firm. Package delivered? Subject J. Vance signed for it? Subject M. Vance present. Standing by. I sent a one-word reply. Report? 3 hours later, the phone buzzed again. A new report. Audible altercation in progress. Raised voices. M. Vance's voice is dominant. Frequent use of your mother and you stupid idiot. J. Vance's responses are inaudible. Sound like pleading. No one has left the residence. I took a sip of my tea. It was a lovely, floral chamomile. An hour after that, Madison's public response appeared. My Denver Reader 19 account, which I checked on my laptop, was treated to a new, defiant post. It was a picture of her, in a bikini, holding a glass of champagne by the infinity pool. The caption was pure, unfiltered arrogance. Jealousy is a terrible disease. Get well soon. It read. When you're this successful, the haters will always try to pull you down. Keep shining. She got over 3,000 likes in an hour. Then, Julian's private response began. My personal cell phone, the one he had the number for, began to ring. It rang, and rang, and rang. It lit up the surface of my mahogany desk, vibrating with his panic. I watched it, letting the call go to voicemail. He called again. Voicemail. A third time. Voicemail. He called 17 times that afternoon. That evening, I sat in my study, put my phone on speaker, and listened to the voicemails he had left. I had a yellow legal pad and a pen, and I took notes. Voicemail. 1:12:51 p.m. Mom, pick up. What is this? This is some kind of sick joke. Right, a legal letter. $500,000. This is insane. Call me back. Mom, this is a terrible misunderstanding. Voicemail 1:30 p.m. Mom, I'm serious. You have to call off your lawyers. She's really upset. You don't understand what you're doing. This is our home. Just call me. We can talk about this. Voicemail 8:45 p.m. Are you just going to ignore me after all this? You can't do this. Eleanor, it's my money. It's my inheritance. You're trying to ruin me. Voicemail 17:05 p.m. You've always been this way. A cold, bitter woman. You just couldn't stand to see me happy. Could you? You had to control it. Well, screw you. You won't get a dime. You'll just call me back. I saved each message as an audio file. I labeled them Exhibit A, Exhibit B, Exhibit C. The PI's report from the next day was far more interesting. Subject M. Vance left the residence at 10 a.m. She was not using her usual vehicle. She took a rideshare to a law office in downtown Scottsdale, firm of Kessler, Broom, and Finch. They specialize in high-asset divorce. She was inside for 3 hours. I smiled. I had assumed this would happen. But the PI's analysis, which I had paid extra for, provided the crucial insight. Madison, the branding expert, was a pragmatist. She had realized, far faster than Julian, the true nature of the bear trap I had set. She understood that the $500,000 down payment, having been acquired under fraudulent pretenses, tainted the entire $4.8 million property. The mansion was no longer an asset. It was a liability, a piece of evidence, and she must have shown her lawyer the personal guarantee Julian had signed. She would have learned that because he had breached his contract. His entire inheritance, his future, was now pledged to me. And in a community property state like Arizona, her empire was inextricably tied to his debt. She hadn't just married a man, she had married his fraud. The final PI report of the week confirmed it. Subject M. Vance made 3 wire transfers from her joint checking account to a new, private account in her mother's name. She sold her leased Porsche, with the proceeds wired to the same account. A high-end art appraiser visited the mansion. Subject J. Vance was not present for any of this. Of course he wasn't. He was too busy leaving me angry voicemails. He was so focused on the mother he had betrayed. He never once thought to check on the wife who was currently, methodically, and silently liquidating his life. The 30-day deadline passed in perfect, legal silence. No payment was made. Not a single dollar. Julian, it seemed, was still operating under the delusion that I was bluffing, that my anger was maternal and would therefore evaporate. He had forgotten I was a historian, and we do not forget a date. On the morning of the 31st day, I authorized Mr. Harrison to proceed. The machine of consequences, which I had so carefully built, began to turn. My lawyers filed the liens. The first act was simple. They froze his bank accounts. The joint accounts he shared with Madison had already been drained by her, but his personal salary account, the one from Apex Solutions, was instantly paralyzed. The second act was to place a lien on his assets, his new, top-of-the-line Tesla, which he had so proudly shown off in the background of one of Madison's videos, was now legally mine to claim. But Madison, I had to give her credit, was faster. She was not sentimental. She was a survivor. As my legal team was filing its first motions, her own team was executing its exit strategy. I received the PI report late that afternoon. Subject J. Vance attempted to enter the gated community at 5:30 p.m. His access code was denied. He attempted to call the guardhouse. Guard informed him he was not on the permanent resident list. Subject became irate. Subject M. Vance arrived in a new vehicle, a Range Rover, not leased, and entered the gate without stopping. She did not look at him. The next report came 2 hours later. Subject J.V. is still outside the gate, parked. He has been calling M.V. repeatedly. We have confirmation that M.V. has had the locks on the mansion changed. He is, in effect, locked out. Madison, it turned out, had been very busy. Her divorce lawyer, anticipating my lien on the house, had performed a brilliant, if unethical, maneuver. She had filed an emergency motion, claiming to be a defrauded spouse, and had the property's title temporarily transferred into her name alone, pending the divorce, arguing that it was the only way to protect her asset from Julian's creditor. She had successfully painted him as the sole villain, herself as the innocent victim of his financial deceit. She was severing him. That evening, as my son sat in his car outside a gate he could no longer open, Madison posted a new photograph. It was her, of course, in the infinity pool. The sun was setting. She was holding a glass of champagne, toasting the camera. Her caption read, "Living my best life, free of negativity. Sometimes you have to cut out the toxic parts to grow." She was, quite literally, framing him as the toxic influence she was escaping. The same word she and her mother had used for me. It was almost poetic. Julian, locked out of his castle, his bank accounts frozen, had one last place to turn his job, but I had anticipated that, too. My lawyers had sent a standard, legally required notice to his employer, Apex Solutions, as part of the asset freezing process. It had triggered their internal compliance department. The final PI report of the week was almost an afterthought. Subject J. Vance has been placed on administrative leave from Apex Solutions. Our intel suggests their internal audit found he had been attempting to secure a large corporate loan to pay a private debt yours. This violated his employment contract. He is fired, in effect. He just hasn't received the final paperwork. He had nowhere to go. His new parents were, of course, siding with their daughter. His friends were Madison's friends. He had no money. His car was about to be repossessed. He had been cut out and erased, just as he had done to me. I almost felt a twinge of something, a cold echo of pity. But then, the final email from the PI arrived. It came at 11 p.m., my time. The subject line was simple. Target acquired. I opened the attached file. It was a series of photographs, taken with a long-range lens, time-stamped just minutes before. They were grainy, lit only by the green-white glow of a supermarket sign. The setting was the 24-hour parking lot of a Safeway. The subject was Julian. He was in the driver's seat of his Tesla, the last asset he had. He was still wearing the expensive suit from his administrative leave meeting. But it was deeply wrinkled, the tie pulled loose. He was asleep. His head was slumped against the side window, his mouth open. He looked exhausted. pathetic, and utterly defeated. The title of my story, the one I had been writing in my head, it had come true. My son was homeless, sleeping in his car while his wife showed off a new mansion online. I saved the photographs to my evidence file. I had it all. The fraud, the motive, the betrayal, and now, the consequence. I closed the laptop. I had my proof. I had my victory. But the story was not quite finished. There was one last chapter to write, one final reckoning to be had. It was 2 weeks later. The legal battle was proceeding, a slow grind of affidavits and motions. I was in my study, finalizing my research on the Byzantine mosaics, when I heard it. A pounding, not a knock, but a frantic, furious hammering on my front door. I did not need to look through the peephole. I knew who it was. I walked calmly to the foyer and opened the door. He stood there, a ghost of the man from the glass palace. He was thin, gaunt, his expensive suit now a wrinkled shroud. His beard was patchy, his eyes a spiderweb of red from exhaustion and pure rage. He had lost everything. The Tesla had been repossessed. The last I'd heard. He was driving a rusted 20-year-old sedan he'd bought for a few $100s. "You ruined my life," he screamed, his voice cracking. He lunged forward, but I stood, braced, in the doorway, blocking his entry. "You did this? Madison left me. I lost the house, I lost my job, I have nothing. All of it, all because of $500,000. I looked at this creature, this child man I had raised, and I felt nothing. The ice in my veins was absolute. "No," I said, and my voice was sharp, a shard of that ice. "Not because of the money." He stared at me, confused. The anger was so hot, he couldn't think. "Then what?" he spat. "What, because I didn't invite you to the damn party? Is that it? You're this petty because you called me toxic," I said, my voice low and steady. "Because you stood in your stolen house and let your wife call me your dramatic, poor past, while you were living on my money. Because you took 40 years of my sacrifice, my abandoned career, my sold-off family treasures, and you held it in your hand, and you threw it on the floor like it was trash, just so you could impress a woman who was already cheating on you." The fury in his face collapsed, like a building imploding. The rage vanished, replaced by a raw, hollow-eyed desperation. He finally understood. It had never been about the money. It had been about the acknowledgement. "Mom," he whispered, his face crumbling. "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. I just wanted her to love me. I wanted to be someone." "You chose," I said, cutting him off. The word was a scalpel. "You stood at your secret wedding and you toasted your real family. And this, Julian, this is the consequence of that choice. You have the family you deserve." He broke. He started to cry. Not quiet tears, but ugly, heaving sobs, snot and tears mixing in his unkempt beard. He sank to his knees on my welcome mat. "Please, Mum, please. I'm your son. I'm living in my car. I haven't eaten today. I have nothing." I looked down at him, this 30-year-old man, weeping on my doorstep. I looked at him for a long, quiet moment. I stepped back, went to the small table in the foyer, and picked up my purse. I took out my wallet. I removed a single, crisp, $100 bill. I stepped back to the door, opened it, and dropped the bill at his feet. It landed on the mat next to his shaking hand. "That is for a hotel room and a meal," I said. My voice was devoid of all emotion. As for the mansion, Madison can have it. My lawyers are allowing her to keep it in exchange for her testimony about your joint financial deceptions. The court will, of course, discover the assets she's hidden from you. But that's a fight for you two. You both deserve each other. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with one final, desperate hope. He was looking for his mother. I am your trustee, Julian, I said, and our business is concluded. I closed the door. I did not slam it. I closed it firmly, and I turned the deadbolt. The click of the lock was the loudest, most final sound I had ever heard. I stood there for a moment in the silence of my hallway. I did not feel anger. I did not feel sadness. I did not feel victory. I felt nothing. Just the quiet, clean piece of a book that has finally been read, catalogued, and placed back on the shelf. The past was, at last, where it belonged. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please comment below and let us know where you're listening from. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, like this video, and give it some extra support by hitting that hype button so this story can be heard by more people.